From WXOJLP Northampton, 103.3 FM, your Valley Free radio station. Welcome. I'm Warren Odess-Gillette, and this is A Baha'i Perspective. A Baha'i Perspective is a radio program that presents interviews of ordinary people who chose for some reason to follow the Baha'i way of life. If you want information specifically on the Baha'i faith, you're welcome to visit the website www.baha'i.org, that's BAHAI.org, or you can call the toll-free number 1-800-22-UNITE. Today I'm playing a telephone interview with Jeff Bohnhoff, a Baha'i musician and musical producer who moved around a lot growing up, going to about 12 different schools. He became a Baha'i after marrying Maya, who was a Baha'i. For her interview, you can go to my website, www.abahaiperspective.com. It was the Baha'i book, Thief in the Night, by William Sears, that led Jeff to becoming a Baha'i. Jeff talks about filk music, as did Maya in her interview. I started the interview by asking Jeff to describe his growing up years.
I actually didn't grow up in any particular place. When I was a kid, we moved around a lot. I sat down once and figured out that between the time I started kindergarten and graduated from high school, I'd attended actually 12 different schools.
Wow.
So we lived a fair amount in Southern California, a little bit in Northern California. I lived in Germany. I lived in Boston. So I can't really say that there was a place that I grew up, but I think that for the most part, other than when I lived in Germany, I think I grew up in kind of a suburban environment for the most part around Southern California and in the Boston area. So I guess that was sort of the basic environment I grew up in a lot of different places.
And what caused you to move around so much, Jeff?
My father was a flight navigator, which is a job that doesn't exist anymore. And actually, at the point when I was growing up, it was sort of at the tail end of airlines using human flight navigators. They were all transitioning to inertial guidance, which is an automated system for determining the position of an aircraft. So basically, at that point, we were moving around sort of following jobs to where there were airlines that still were using human navigators.
What took your father to Germany?
Well, that was actually the last job he had as a navigator. He had been flying for an airline called World Airways based out of Oakland, and we lived in Northern California during that time, and that job ended. World made their transition to inertial guidance and laid off all their navigators, and we actually moved down to Southern California, and my dad this was in about 1970 or so, and my dad actually went to computer programming school, and he was studying to be a computer programmer, which I don't think he really cared much for it. He seemed very happy during that period, and there was a lot of uncertainty, and an opportunity came along. Lufthansa, the national carrier for Germany, needed some navigators for the short term, and they didn't want to hire directly. They didn't want to hire Germans to do it because they were already in the process of retraining their existing German navigators to other jobs rather than just laying them off outright. But they had a short-term need, so they contracted with an American company to hire some American flight crews for a few years. So my dad heard about that and decided to do navigation for at least a few more years before he settled on something else, and so we went off to Germany.
So what is a flight navigator?
Well, he used to use different means, including, very archaic stuff like sextants and, taking sightings of stars to manually plot the position of the airplane in flight on transatlantic in flight. Basically, when an airplane is not flying over land, there needs to be some means of determining its position. It's now all completely automated. There are no airlines left that use flight navigators, but at the time, there was a human being who there was actually in the airliners. My dad was working on Boeing 707s at the end of his career, and there was actually a little kind of bubble in the top of the cockpit where he could stick his head up and take star readings with a sextant, and they had other means too. There was kind of a primitive radio control system called Loran that they used to make calculations. But it was the position of the airplane was actually determined by a guy in the cockpit, every half hour or so to figure out whether they were still on course.
So they had three people then, the pilot, co-pilot, and then the flight navigator?
Actually, there were four. There was also a guy called the flight engineer whose job it was. The planes were a lot less automated. The instrumentation was a lot more primitive. And there was a guy whose job it was to make sure that the fuel usage was okay and that the hydraulics were working. And so it was actually a four-member flight crew at the time.
Wow.
But yeah, nowadays I think it's pretty much all just
two
pilot,
people,
co-pilot, and most of the modern airliners.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah.
So how old were you while you were in Germany?
Let's see. We moved to Germany, I think, in early 1971. So I had just turned 12.
Mm-hmm. And how long were you in Germany?
We were only in Germany actually for, we moved back in September of 72. So I guess a bit less than 2 years.
Yeah.
And basically, my father was being paid by the American company that was contracting to Lufthansa, so we were being paid in dollars and paying U.S. Income taxes and not paying German taxes. And the German Parliament changed their tax laws so that we were going to be double taxed. So Lufthansa took all of their American flight crews and based them in the Boston area, which is how I ended up there.
I see.
To avoid double taxation on the Americans' incomes. So we were that job actually lasted for about 5 years. We were in Boston for about 3 years before we moved back to Northern California when the Lufthansa job ended.
Yeah, it's interesting. You knew so much about your father's situation at such a young age.
Well, yeah, it was interesting because I remember one of the things in Germany, I have to confess that at the time, 12 years old was kind of probably a bad age for me to get, uprooted. I was in a German school, sort of trying to learn to speak German and keep up with my schoolwork at the same time. So I felt, kind of like I was the dummy in the class. And so I was not terribly happy most of the time we were in Germany. In retrospect, I'm glad I had the experience, but at the time it wasn't too great. But I remember one of the great pleasures, and we didn't have television. My parents never bought a TV while we were there, and so for an American kid of that age, that was just, at first, it was like, oh my gosh.
Right.
But we got over that. We listened to the radio and stuff. But one of the things we used to do is go out with the other American flight crews a lot, the other navigators and some of the flight engineers that Lufthansa had hired. And, almost every Friday night we'd go out to dinner, and they would just sit around talking about, things that had happened on their flights and, some of the miscalculations and mishaps that threw some of them off course and, whatnot. So I was hearing about it all the time, and I was really interested in it. So I used to just, stay up into the night, listen to them tell their stories.
Yeah. So what interested you when you were a kid?
What interested me? I was really interested in astronomy and science when I was a little kid. I thought I was going to grow up and be an astronomer. I was not very athletic. I enjoyed sports. I loved to play baseball, but I was really bad at it. So I did Little League for a couple of years when we lived in Simi Valley in Southern California for a while, and I played a couple of years of Little League there, and I really liked it, but I was not a good player, and this was in the the less enlightened time when the kids who weren't very good just didn't get to play very much.
Yeah.
Not like now where my kids have all played Little League and everybody gets to play no matter what, which I think is a lot better. So I gave up on that, but just normal kid stuff really. But I was kind of I guess a little science geek when I was a kid. I really liked astronomy and stuff like that. I loved to have like pet lizards and frogs and stuff like that, and I loved to read.
Yeah. Now, when did you get into music?
I got into music actually when we moved to Boston. I fell in with a group of kids. I'd always wanted to play guitar. I can remember hearing guitar music from the time I was a little kid and going, boy, I wish I could do that, but never really did anything about it. And when we moved to Boston, I was still in with a group of kids that, where most of the other kids played guitar, and my dad had a kind of a crummy old guitar that my mom had bought him for their 10th anniversary laying around the house. And so he wasn't using it, and he didn't care whether I played it, so I sort of inherited that guitar and started hanging out with these guys that were playing guitar and just picked up things by watching them, and, you know, and just got very, very passionate about it, although at first I wasn't very good at all. I was not a natural at all.
What age was that?
This would have been, let's see, probably, I guess, about 14, maybe 13, late 13, 14, something like that.
Yeah. Did you ever put it down?
No.
Yeah.
No, from the time I picked it up, I mean, I've never stopped.
Yeah. So were you in any bands?
I was in tons of bands. I remember I got, the last Christmas we were in Boston, my dad had been laid off, and, you know, money was tight, and I had started on this really, really bad acoustic guitar, which was very hard to play. That's kind of the ironic thing about the starter guitars that a lot of kids have, is they're much harder to play than the better instruments, so it's almost like a discouragement to kids who are just starting out. But I had saved up some money and bought myself a fairly decent acoustic guitar, but I really wanted an electric guitar. And I remember the last Christmas before we moved, I guess my parents decided it was going to be kind of the last hurrah for a while, and so they got me an electric guitar for Christmas. And, you know, I got back to school after that Christmas and mentioned to some other kids I knew that I had an electric guitar, and I got invited to play rhythm guitar in a band almost immediately, and I've been in bands almost.
Yeah. So when did you leave home?
When did I leave home? Actually, when I married Maya, I stayed at home through school. My parents settled in Northern California after we left Boston and started a business, and I lived with them through college. I commuted to Sacramento from Grass Valley. Did my 4 years of college and got my degree, and then I married Maya about a month after I graduated from college and moved out of home at that point.
Now, what did you study in college?
Anthropology.
What were you hoping to do when you got out of school?
I was hoping to be a rock star.
So why did you study anthropology?
Well, you know, a lot of people ask me that. They said, well, why didn't you study music? And, you know, my thinking at the time, such as it was that I actually went into college as a journalism major, and I realized pretty early on that I didn't really want to be a journalist, and there was no point in studying it if you weren't going to use it. It's not the sort of thing that really broadens your horizons. It's almost, you know, vocational school type of thing, how to write a news story, how to do this, how to do that.
Right.
And I took an intro, you know, it's just part of the general requirement for graduation. You know, of course, there are all kinds of general classes you need to take, and I signed up for an intro to anthropology class, and I really liked the professor, and the subject just fascinated me. So I switched my major to anthropology, just figuring that, well, you know, at least it's the kind of knowledge that kind of broadens your horizons, even if you don't do anything with it. And I was convinced that, you know, that Maya and I's band was going to break big, and we were going to be big rock stars, so I might as well just study something that was interesting to me. So there was no real shrewd plan at all. It was sort of just because it interested me.
Yeah. Was it interesting to you for the whole 4 years?
Oh, yeah, it was. I mean, I learned pretty early on. I mean, I had the professor who taught the first class I had was an extraordinary lecturer, and I had a little bit of a rude awakening the next semester. There was another required course I took from a professor who was just guaranteed to put you to sleep. But, you know, I was still interested in the subject, and you know, it had its ups and downs. But, yeah, I stayed very interested in it. I had lots of really good classes. It was really interesting, and I haven't kept up with it very well, so I'm sure most of what I learned is hopelessly out of date. I was particularly interested in evolution and primatology. I know that there have been a lot of discoveries and a lot of new theories on those areas that are probably put what I learned in school, you know, completely out of date. But it was interesting.
Yeah. What was your religious upbringing like?
Non-existent, really. My mom is Jewish, although she doesn't practice in any way, and I know that she was very upset. And she grew up in the Milwaukee area, and I think that they went to synagogue just a little bit, and it was a synagogue where the women were segregated from the men, and she was very offended by that. So no real training in that tradition. And my father's, I honestly don't know what his parents practiced. I think he was very briefly a Catholic in college himself, and didn't stay with that for long at all. I think a girl he was interested in was Catholic. And,
Yeah.
so really pretty non-existent. I remember once or twice my parents took us to a church, and I don't think my mom liked what she saw there, and it didn't last long. We went to Sunday school, I think, once or twice, and I never went to synagogue or anything like that.
Mm. What did you do when you got out of college?
I was playing in the band with Maya and teaching guitar and working in music stores.
Mm-hmm. And
trying to keep the bills paid,
Right. So you and Maya were in a band while you were in college?
Yeah, I joined a band that Maya was in fall of 1979, just about 2 years before we got married.
Yeah.
They had been a kind of an acoustic-oriented band, kind of a folk band, and they were interested in moving in more of a rock direction. I had been playing in rock bands around the area for years. I can remember, it's funny, we were playing, both of our bands were playing at the county fair in Nevada County, I think the year before I joined her band, maybe 2 years. And I remember I knew them around town because I worked in a music store in Nevada City, and I was familiar with them, and I knew that they were really an acoustic band. And the band I was playing at the time was really the first. We called it a heavy metal band, but by today's standards, it was a hard rock band. We were playing Led Zeppelin and Deep Purple and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember we were playing at the fair, and Maya and the other people from her band kind of came to see us, and I kind of thought to myself, what are they doing here? I mean, they're kind of acoustic folky. They probably think this music's just noise. Mm-hmm. And I was really shocked when they came up to me afterwards and were raving about how good they thought we were, and et cetera. And they were in the process of thinking about moving more in that direction musically.
Mm-hmm.
And so the next year, our band played again, and it was kind of our final band. I was in a band with a couple of other guys that were members of the Mormon faith, and one of them was about to go on his mission.
Mm-hmm.
So the band was breaking up, and Maya said, "Oh, you ought to come see us play." So the next Sunday night at the fair, I came to see their group Talisman, and went up to the stage to talk to Maya and the other people in the band afterwards, and she just sort of said, "Oh, we're playing this benefit concert in a couple of weeks. Why don't you come sit in with us?" So I was kind of looking for something else to do musically anyway, so hauled my amp over to their house and started rehearsing with them, and just sort of never stopped playing with them.
Now, at what point did you find out that Maya was a Baha'i?
Pretty early on. No secret around the house. There were Baha'i books laying around all over the place, and they talked about it, and a lot of the lyrics to the songs that they were writing were Baha'i-oriented. So I can't say that I really understood it all that well at first, but I was aware that it was there, and I started pretty much immediately hanging out with their friends, and right from the start, pretty quickly to what it was about.
Yeah. What was your initial impression of the Baha'i faith?
Well, at the time I was kind of agnostic, leaning towards atheist, and I did not have a great opinion of organized religion, kind of the typical response to someone who's doesn't follow any particular faith. So I thought it sounded really nice, but I wasn't immediately thunderstruck by, this is the Word of God and I should follow this. I thought they were nice people, and I thought that the things that they believed in were things that I tended to agree with. The social teachings and equality of men and women and racial equality and all of those things were nice to me, but it didn't hit me over the head the way it does some people. I guess I'm a little dense. I needed a little more time.
Or maybe just a little more thoughtful.
Well, sure, if you want to give me the benefit of the doubt.
I'm willing to do that. So what changed?
Well, I don't know. It's interesting because we got married, and I was still not a Baha'i.
Yeah.
It's really funny is I can remember, I think in some ways I can thank a friend of mine who was kind of a fundamentalist Christian, actually kind of a confused guy, but one of the things that he was very into was Armageddon, end of the world is coming type of fundamentalist Christianity, and I remember we had a conversation about that, and the number of the beast and all the stuff that has been read by some folks into the book of Revelation. It kind of it's funny. It's like even when you don't believe, you hear this kind of lurid story about all this terrible stuff that's on the verge of happening, and it shakes you a little bit, it scares you. So, I think I've been carrying that around with me, just, awareness of that, belief being, out there and people expecting that. And I remember at the time, I was working mostly in afternoons. I was teaching guitar, giving guitar lessons, so I was mostly doing it after kids got out of school, because most of my students were school kids. And so I was just home one morning. Maya was at work, and I picked up A Thief in the Night by William Sears. And I don't know why. I mean, I'd never had any particular urge to pick up any of the Baha'i books. I mean, I supported Maya following her faith. I went to a lot of the events with her and stuff, the ones that were open to non-Baha'is, and encouraged her to go to feasts, but I just really had zero interest in it myself.
Right.
And I don't even remember why I did. I mean, you know how sometimes you just walk over to a bookcase and grab a book that's been sitting there forever for no particular reason and start reading it? Mm-hmm. I did that with that book, and by the time I got through it, and of course he deals a lot with Christian prophecy and interpreting a lot of Revelation and Isaiah and Micah and the Book of Daniel in a very different way than most Christian groups do. And it just really struck me. And so when Maya got home, I kind of told her that I'd read this book and I was very interested. And really within a few weeks, I had become a Baha'i. It was in, I think, October of 1982.
Okay.
We'd been married a little over a year at that point, about a year and a half.
Yeah. So, are you still working at a music store?
Oh, no. No. I work for a well-known computer and media company.
So what did you do after your stint as a music store clerk?
I worked for about 10 years for my parents. They started a business. They actually started it in 1977, and while I was in school. As I recall, we had a particularly emotional breakup of the band we were in.
Which band was this?
Well, let's see, I'm trying to remember. I believe this was a band called, it was still called Talisman, but it was completely different people by now. Maya and I were the only people left, so Maya was the only original member left, and it was actually some people from bands I had played with in the past, and other, we went through many, many incarnations of that band, actually. I would have to sit down and think how many members came and went, but
why was it an emotional breakup?
I don't know. We had just it always is. A band can be a very, very difficult thing to keep together. I mean, you know how much work it is to have a relationship with two people, and you've got 4 or 5 involved, where you're working very intimately together. It can be really hard, and I don't remember exactly what the circumstances were, but somebody quit the band, and then somebody else quit too, and it was kind of just Maya and I again, and we were just kind of upset about it. And I was working for one of the people who had quit the band at the music store, and I wasn't making that much money, so I kind of decided it was time to maybe go on and do something else. So I was actually visiting my folks at their store, and at this point they actually had 2 stores. They had a lighting fixture shop and a wholesale electric shop, and mentioned it, and I don't remember whether I said, oh, well, maybe I should come work for you guys, or if they offered to me, but by the time I left that day, I was starting work the next day for my parents. That ended up going on for about 10 years.
And what did you do for them, for the business?
Being a family-run business, I did a little of everything. I mean, I mostly, especially at first, I worked in the wholesale electric shop. I did ordering. I figured up the accounts at the end of every month. I waited on customers. Just a little bit of everything, really. Just a family business.
And you were still doing music at the same time?
Yeah, I was. Maya and I had quickly formed another band and with different people, and we kept playing music. And sure, I mean, I've never stopped playing music the entire time I've took up the guitar.
Right. So those 10 years, did your musical style change?
I think I wouldn't say it changed. It evolved. I mean, we were still playing rock music. Our influences got maybe a little bit broader, but we were still, the stuff we were really into at the time, I guess, was kind of some of the 80s rock bands and groups like Rush, and trying to do kind of progressive rock, I guess. influences.
So you're still doing cover band music type stuff?
Yeah, well, we kind of went back and forth. I mean, when I joined Maya's band initially in '79, we were doing all originals, and then it was hard to get gigs playing original music, especially paying gigs. So we started doing covers, sort of, telling ourselves, oh, well, this is just a short-term thing to, get some gigs, and then just slipping the occasional original song in. And then when that ended, we went back to all originals pretty much from then on out.
Yeah. So what do you do after you worked at your parents' business?
Well, yeah, they ended up, the recession in the early 90s kind of forced them out of business, and I had one very unpleasant job for a very short time, and then I got a job doing tech support for a computer software company.
So how did you get involved in computers? I mean, did you have the technical skills?
Well, I had started, one of the things that happened was, it was actually born of another even more painful band breakup. Maya and I formed a band called Syntax with 3 other people, and we we found a manager, and we all, he invested some money, and we all pooled some money. Maya and I pooled a lot of money into going to a major studio and recording a 6-song demo tape to really try to get a recording contract. And we poured, I think, $7,000 into this project, which for us was just a huge amount of money, especially in the early days. It was like in 1985. It was just a huge amount of money for us.
Yeah.
And the band broke up soon after we spent all that money.
Oh, boy.
And Maya and I were just really, really despondent about it. It was just, we just couldn't see trying to form another band. And I wanted to keep doing music. So Maya had bought herself a computer a little while before, a PC, and I started reading about this new technology called MIDI, which allowed you to control synthesizers and stuff from computers. And I thought, well, gee, I could, compose music on this and perform as a duo. So that's what we did. I mean, I ended up investing a fair amount of money over the years in racks of synthesizers and drum machines and MIDI-controlled light show, and we basically performed even more complicated, more intricate music than we'd ever done with a live band with just the 2 of us. I was playing guitar, and she was singing, and the computer running everything else. And I basically created all the arrangements at home. So I got into that, and so I had a really good background in that sort of technology. And a company called eMagic, which is actually a German-based company, a music software company, happened to have their U.S. offices in the little town I lived in, Grass Valley, and a friend of mine was involved with them and called me up and asked if I'd be interested in doing tech support for them. So in June of 1995, I started doing that, and I've basically been doing that or variations of it ever since.
Your website is www.mysticfig.com. And if somebody goes there, what are they going to find?
Well, the website has information about the music that Maya and I are doing currently, and also a lot of information about Maya's writing. In terms of the musical stuff, it's got some pages dedicated to our album of original music, which is called Manhattan Sleeps. And then also another kind of side area we got into, which actually is where we do a lot of our performing, is as Maya's writing career took off, and she started out writing mostly science fiction and fantasy, and we attended a lot of science fiction conventions after she started getting published, to promote her books and her career. We discovered after a couple of years of attending them that there's a very active music scene at these things. And we started participating in that. So we've got a couple of albums that are called folk music, and it's basically kind of a variation of folk music. There's a whole long story of how that came to be, but it's the music that gets played at these science fiction conventions, and there are a lot of people all over the world who do this, and we've actually kind of carved a little niche for ourselves out in that area, and so we've recorded a couple of albums of parody songs, which are very popular in those particular scenes, and we sell a lot of CDs at the conventions we attend, and we get invited to perform at a lot of them. The past year, we've been invited to be guests of honor at, 3 or 4 conventions, and we're going to be performing this coming year in Atlanta, near London, in the UK, Chicago.
Wow.
Basically being invited to special guests at these conventions, so it's been really nice.
Yeah, I played Come to Mordor in Maya's interview. Yeah. So it comes from the Beatles song Come Together,
Right.
and then you replace the original words with words, I guess, that come from the story of...
Well, yeah, in that case, Mordor is sort of the land of evil in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. It's
Right.
where Sauron, the Satan of Tolkien's world, is based. What I'm doing with these songs, and like I said, we've got 2 CDs of them, and we'll probably do another one in the future after I finish the original album that we're working on right now.
Mm-hmm.
They're parodies of basically a lot of the same kind of rock songs that I grew up playing, in bands when I was a kid in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a parody of Come Together, and we've got parodies of all kinds of other songs. Every Little Thing She Does Is Magic by the Police, or Reeling in the Years by Steely Dan. And I just, sort of like Weird Al,
Mm-hmm.
I just write alternate humorous lyrics because we're mostly performing this stuff at these science fiction conventions. Very often I choose either science fiction or fantasy themes, although not always.
Right. So you have to sort of know what you're talking about in the song, in the parody.
Yeah,
to
it kind of
understand.
helps to have, I think that's true with most parodies.
Yeah.
If the person listening to it ideally is familiar with the original song that you're doing the parody of, and also the subject that you're changing the lyric to talk about.
Right.
So,
yeah. So, Jeff, what's your current project?
well, I'm working on a couple of things right now. We're working on a new album of original songs, tentatively going to be titled Mobius Street, which is the title of one of the songs on the album.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not carved in stone yet. We might call it something else. So I'm still tracking that and actually still writing some of the material that's going to go on it. And I'm also going to be starting work on producing an album for somebody else, probably in a few months. We've got some upcoming appearances. Like I said, we'll be appearing in Georgia in January and in the UK in February, also in Chicago in June.
Mm-hmm. So what's involved with producing an album?
Really, for me, it's taking someone who is just basically is a singer. I'm working with a very talented woman named Shauna McGuire who writes songs but doesn't play an instrument. So she basically comes up with melodies and lyrics. I'm going to be coming up with all of the arrangements for the songs, working with her, make sure that they match what she wants for the song, and then basically wrangling all the other musicians who'll be involved. In this case, probably not too many. I'll probably play most of the stuff, instruments on this particular project, recording it and mixing it, and probably in this case mastering it, because I doubt if she'll have the budget to hire another mastering engineer. And then sending it off to the duplicators to be manufactured. Basically, kind of combination of recording engineer and artistic consultant, I guess.
What would you like to do in the future? Or do you have a project or a vision of a project in the future that you would like to do?
There are all kinds of things. I mean, I just really love working in the studio. I love experimenting with sounds and creating atmospheres with music and sound. I would love to be doing this full-time in some capacity.
Yeah.
Maya and I also perform a lot for our local Baha'i community. I would always looking for opportunities to do that. We've been involved with the music industry weekends at Bosch several times, although we've missed the last couple because we were performing elsewhere, but I think we'll be probably attending this year. So about a year ago was worked with several other Baha'i producers, with Kelly Snook and Jerome Matthew, and with Catherine Kripke executive producing. We did a CD of quotations from the Ruhi II book set to music.
Okay, let's do a little bit of explanation for folks who are not so familiar with Baha'i faith. You mentioned the Bosch Baha'i School, which is a Baha'i learning center in Northern California.
Yes, in the mountains near Santa Cruz. And they have pretty much every weekend they have presentations and classes on various aspects of the Baha'i faith and spirituality. And Michael Eisinger, who runs a web-based Baha'i radio station called Radio Nur, has been sponsoring these music industry weekends for the past several years, where he invites Baha'i musicians, professional musicians, people working in various capacities, whether producers, performers, composers, whatnot, and also just anybody interested in pursuing music, whether they're currently a professional or not. to basically consult about what the future of Baha'i music might be, whether we can perhaps build a different kind of music industry from the one that we all have to deal with now.
And what would that music industry look like?
I honestly don't know yet. I think it's too early to tell, and it would be nice to think that perhaps music with more substance would become more popular with people in general in the future, and that the way it's marketed might be, I don't know, somewhat more based on the merits of the music than is currently the case. But I don't really like to get off into whining how things are, because it just it sounds like sour grapes, because I haven't made it, and all these other people have. But I don't really feel that way. But I do think that most people involved in the music industry today agree that it's not an optimal situation now. The way music is made and distributed doesn't necessarily reward the right people.
Do you think the internet in some way has changed that?
I think it's changing. It's certainly shifting, and I'm far from an authority on everything that's going on. But I mean, certainly there are people who are finding ways to promote themselves outside of the normal music industry structure. I think that's great. It's still, the internet is a big place, and getting yourself noticed is hard.
Right.
But some people are definitely managing to do it. And there are people even, beyond the internet, people who are building successful careers for themselves outside of the normal music industry without relying completely on the internet. I'm thinking of, I don't know if you're familiar with a musician named Annie DeFranco.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, and she has a very, very respectable following. She records all her own stuff. She distributes it herself. She's not beholden to a major label, so she doesn't sell anything like the units that a hit album from a major label does, but she sees a huge percentage of the profit from what she does sell.
Right.
And I think, I don't know the details of her career and her numbers, but I think that she actually makes probably a better living than some of the people who you would think are making tons of money because they're so well known, but actually who only make pennies on every CD they sell.
Right.
I think Annie is a particularly well-organized, and she's a very talented musician. I mean, she's a great songwriter. I mean, so she deserves every bit of success she gets. And she's found a way to work outside the system that most people have had to work with. And, so, but that, I think she's kind of an exception, because she's just really, really talented at promoting herself in the way she wants to be promoted. I'm not sure everybody could do that, but yeah, I think the internet is a possible avenue. It's just, there's so many of us out there on the internet, and still getting people to go to your site and maybe spend a little money on your music is probably as hard as ever.
Right. And maybe we need to rethink what success really means, because I look at you and Maya, and you're basically making a living doing what you want to do. And there are so many musicians that do what they want to do at night, and they have a day job. Whereas I think my impression from talking to both of you, that you're doing exactly what you want to do, and you're able to make a living on it and continue in that vein. And to me,
Maya
definitely
is. I still have a day job. I like my job, but I'm not
the tech support stuff.
Working with music software on a more technical level, and that's fine. I would love to be actually doing music for a living somehow, but I long ago stopped pining for that big break and the major label contract and all that stuff, because I honestly don't believe that would be the best thing for us right now.
Right.
So we have a tremendous amount of fun and satisfaction in what we do musically when we do play, whether it's for the Baha'i community or at the science fiction conventions. We are playing for audiences who are actually interested in listening to us.
That's nice.
Not because it's cool or because it's some sort of social thing, but because they're actually interested in hearing what we have to say lyrically and in hearing our music. And that's very gratifying. I would much rather do that than be paid a lot of money to play for people who really don't care.
Yeah. I hope you enjoyed that interview with Jeff Bohnhoff, a Baha'i musician, composer, and musical producer living in California. The music that you will hear in conclusion is from Jeff and Maya Bohnhoff. For a copy of this and other interviews, you can go to the website www.abahaiperspective.com. For information specifically on the Baha'i Faith, you can go to the website www.baha'i.org, or you can call the toll-free number 1-800-22-UNITE.